Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our fourth webinar, I believe, in our Arts for All series. Third webinar. Thank you, Amanda. I'm Mary Reeves, the Director of Community Access here at Able South Carolina, and I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to do a quick introduction and hello and get us all started. We're so happy that you're back with us today.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So excited for you all being here and taking some of your afternoon to spend some time with us. My name is Amanda Noyes. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white female with brown hair wearing a burgundy shirt today. And I am the K-12 and accessibility coordinator for the South Carolina Arts Commission. And just so excited that we are continuing this webinar series. This is our third one here, and would just love to share a little bit about how our relationship with Able SC has developed over time. In my role as the accessibility coordinator for the Arts Commission back at the end of 2022, we wanted to try to figure out ways to increase ways that we're supporting arts organizations in increasing their accessibility efforts and making their spaces and programs and digital spaces more accessible to people with disabilities. And so in doing that, we created a grant category called Arts for All SC. Throughout that grant category, this program really invited arts organizations to come in and enter into this time of learning through some different professional development opportunities, and then really do some to look inward at their own programs and spaces, identify what barriers might exist, and then use grant funds to address those barriers. So we worked really closely with Able throughout that time. They've provided some program assessments and audits for these organizations, and just overall support and knowledge and information. And they've just been a really amazing partner. Through that partnership, we've developed these webinar series. Able is also providing some different technical supports, as well as some different opportunities to engage in other audits and assessments. So there may be ways that they can connect with you more closely as well. So would love to be able to connect you all if you have interest after this webinar and questions about ways to connect with them. And then we're also in our next phase of this next round of grants for the Arts for All SC grant program. We're accepting applications right now for those who are operating support grantees. So if you're interested in knowing more about that, would love to speak with you, connect with you. But today we have Mary Alex here, and she is going to share with us about alternative formats and how to make our communications more accessible. So I'm going to pass it over to her. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Amanda. We are going to jump in and get started because I have a lot of content to share with y'all today. I do want to kind of preface by saying that I do not expect you to memorize everything that I'm providing today. The slides will be provided after the fact for you to refer to, but we're really going to be taking kind of a high level view of alternative formats and accessible communications. So my name is Mary Alex Kopp. I am the Vice President and Chief Public Relations Officer here at Able South Carolina. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a white woman with in the picture on screen, curly brown hair, but today kind of straightened out into waves a little bit, and wearing glasses today. And on screen is my headshot that we use for work, smiling outside with a blue blazer on, but working from home today, I am in a much more comfortable dark purple sweater. So a quick note about Able's mission and vision. I believe that y'all have probably seen this a few times, so we're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but we are an organization of people with disabilities leading the charge to equip, educate, and advocate. And we have a vision for a South Carolina that is a national model of equity and inclusion for all people with disabilities. And we have pictured on screen a photo of our staff at our annual Advocacy Day for Access and Independence event. Throughout the presentation, I will be reading a good bit of what is on screen, as well as describing the images. And then, of course, you heard me describe myself. And part of why we do that is to ensure that our content is accessible, that this presentation is accessible. So for our friends in the disability community who experience visual-related disabilities, the only way that they're able to take in the visual content that those of us who do not have visual disabilities experience is if we tell them what it is that we're looking at. So providing that visual description of myself, I have now provided them with information about me and who I am as a person that those of us who do not have visual disabilities would already automatically take in. So that's an accessibility feature that we will continue throughout the presentation. And we're actually going to touch on it a little bit too with talking about some of the ways that we need to make our content accessible. So a few objectives of what we're going to get from this training today. So after this, you'll be able to recognize the benefits of creating accessible content across platforms, utilize language to communicate inclusively and respectfully with people with disabilities, understand the importance of accessible video, audio, and images, identify elements of accessible document structure or content and their formats for accessibility, and understand ways to ensure that your programs are keeping inclusivity centered. So first and foremost, why accessibility? Why is this important? Disability represents the largest marginalized community. In the United States, it is understood that 1 in every 4 Americans has a disability. And in South Carolina, that rate is higher, as 1 in 3 South Carolinians has a disability, which we see is about over 1.2 million people. Those statistics are provided to us by the Centers for Disease Control. We know that disability crosses all social, racial, and cultural groups. At some point in your life, you will become disabled, whether that's through age or an accident or something else in your life that may have that disability occur to you. Accessible communication does in fact benefit everyone. We are going to focus on disability today, but we're also going to talk about how accessible communication is great for overall public. Barriers people with disabilities experience often include programmatic barriers, architectural barriers, and attitudinal barriers. And in talking about accessible communications, a lot of times the barriers that prevent people from being able to access your content are in fact attitudinal. We'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. But ultimately, I want you to remember that there are many parts to accessibility, and inclusion just does not exist without all of them. So another point as to why do we need accessibility, if tugging on the heartstrings isn't enough and reminding you of taking care of your fellow man, it is in fact the law. So we do have the law on our side. I've got a few disability rights laws and legislation on the screen here. Sections 508 and 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, IDEA, and Plain Writing Act. Depending on how your organization receives federal, state, local funding, you may be under, or your organization may be impacted by some of these laws more than others. Primarily, though, the Americans with Disabilities Act affects all of us. So we will reference that several times throughout the presentation. So digital accessibility, let's take a second to focus on that, because quite a bit of what we're going to discuss today is going to be related to digital accessibility. So digital accessibility is the term that's given to all the considerations that, when brought together, make sure that our websites, our digital documents, presentations, social media, any content that could be found in a digital space is equitably accessible to people with a wide variety of disabilities. So who's affected by digital accessibility? This would be primarily people with visual disabilities. We're going to talk about that quite a bit today. So folks who experience blindness, low vision, or color blindness, people with hearing disabilities, so folks of the deaf community or hard of hearing, People with motor disabilities are impacted by digital accessibility. So if you have an inability to use a mouse or an impacted response time or limited fine motor control, or you may be reliant on speech technology or other navigation. And then people with cognitive and intellectual disabilities, things like distractibility, focus and memory issues, or a need for plain language. All of these groups are affected by digital accessibility. A few basics, and we're going to really kind of get into quite a few of these. Providing captions or other alternatives for multimedia, make it easier for users to see and hear content, make all of your functionality available from a keyboard, make content appear and operate in predictable ways, use headings and lists with proper formatting, and provide text alternatives such as alt text and image descriptions, which we're going to talk quite a bit about for photo and graphics-based content. As we progress through the presentation, there's going to be some content that we focus on more than others because there will be an additional presentation in a couple months from now from my coworker, Sarah Massengale, who will really get into the nitty-gritty of some of the things that you need to know for document structure and website accessibility. So if I haven't said it already, who benefits from accessibility? Ultimately, everyone does. Particularly when thinking about creating accessible content from kind of the arts perspective or trying to create something artistic with your content. We can often find ourselves getting wrapped up in whether or not what we're making is beautiful or appealing. And that is really limiting your scope to just the visual. It's great if something's beautiful or appealing, but it's really important that it's actually functional too, because that is what makes it good. So we're going to talk a little more about that and ensuring that when we make our content, it's not just nice to look at, it's also benefiting the folks that you're intending to use it. So a quick note on assistive technology. So assistive technology, or AT for short, are devices that allow people with disabilities to fully and equitably access the world around them. So AT can include anything from a mobility aid to a device that helps somebody get to access to the internet or other digital spaces. So I've got a list here of some examples. So a white cane, that would be a white cane that folks with visual disabilities use. Communication devices, the door open buttons that you may see in some public places, wheelchair lifts, Alexa and Siri are forms of assistive technology for a lot of people, especially folks who have them integrated within their homes. Screen readers, voice control apps, text to speech, those are all some examples. The list goes on and on and on. I even, like to say if you're a glasses or contact wearer like myself, it's very small and very common, but this is a form of assistive technology that without I would not be able to get through my day-to-day. All right, let's jump into talking about plain language and easy read. I like to talk about plain language first when talking about content development, because more than likely that's where you're starting from, is what is it that you're writing? What are you trying to communicate to people? So plain language is communications that's made to ensure that as many people as possible can read, understand, and process the information that you're giving them. Plain language uses everyday language that's accessible to everyone. Jargon, academic, or legal complex terms can cause access barriers, so we do not use those in plain language. We use short sentences with small syllables, but ultimately, I want you to remember that plain language helps people with low literacy, people who speak English as a non-native language, as well as people with disabilities. So a couple of things about what it does do, what it doesn't do. So plain language always puts the audience first. It can improve your writing style, content, organization, and format, and it promotes honest and open communication and ultimately improves your service through cleaner forms, documents, letters, signs, wherever it is that your content's appearing. What it does not do, and I kind of hesitate, honestly, to even say it this way, but a lot of people immediately think, oh, plain language, dumb it down. And no, that is absolutely not what plain language does. It does not use improper language. It does not use patronizing language. It does not change the essential idea of your content, and it is does not use inaccurate or incomplete or imprecise writing. So some tips: know your audience, know who it is you're speaking to, use everyday language. Don't try to, this is not the time to break out your dissertation formal language when you're trying to develop accessible content. Consider using personal pronouns like you, that helps someone kind of relate to your material. Avoid slang. Slang can be incredibly confusing, not only for people with learning related disabilities, but people who do not speak English as their primary language. Short logical sentences, leave out details that could be distracting for your reader, avoid undefined technical terms, be direct, not wordy. Use headings, subheadings, margins, white space to organize your information, so bulleted lists like we have here on screen. Make your information easy to find, use words with few syllables, and then keep your wording between a 3rd to 5th grade reading level. So I'd like to take a second to practice. We're going to give everybody about a minute. On screen here, I've got a sentence. It says, Mary Alex develops interactive trainings on the importance of accessibility for educators, communicators, employers, and more. I would like for you to take a crack at making this sentence plain language. I'm going to give you about 1 minute. You can submit your response in the chat. Just whenever you're ready, send it right on through. Or if you would like to speak, you can raise your hand and we will allow you to read your response. So we'll give you 1 minute. All right, if you could go ahead and turn in your response on the chat for how you would rewrite this sentence in plain language. So Amanda says, Mary Alex offers interactive accessibility trainings for, and then she has spaced out educators, communicators, employers, and more in a list format. That's great. Cassidy says, Mary Alex teaches educators, employers, communicators, and others about the importance of accessibility. And we have another one that says, Mary Alex educates folks on the importance of accessibility. These are good examples. So let's take a look at our solution. So I have the original sentence at the top here, and then the second thing we did, we're gonna talk through how we broke this down. So the first sentence says, Mary Alex trains people on accessibility, period. Short sentence, boom, right there. You can take part in her trainings, period. She trains, and then we have a colon and bullet points, people who teach, people who share content, people who hire others for jobs, and many others. And you'll notice we took the word educators, communicators, employers, because these could sometimes be seen as large, confusing words depending on your audience, and we defined those. So that is just one example of a way that you could write this in plain language. And many of y'all did give some pretty decent responses in the comments, so I do appreciate that. But plain language is certainly a skill that over time and practice, you definitely learn and you get better at. There's also great tools out there that can help you with plain language. And I've got some resources at the end, but Rewordify is one where you can practice, and then also Readable. And then I want to kind of give a quick shout out, a little hesitant quick shout out to the capabilities of AI technology. So if you're starting out just trying plain language, you can go ahead, write your content. Let's say you write a paragraph with 8 sentences and you think, okay, I need some help breaking this down into plain language. You can copy and paste that over into an AI like ChatGPT and request that it rewrite it in, let's say, plain language in 5 sentences or less. and it can produce something for you. Do not use what it produces without fully editing and double checking. It is not going to create 100% ready to go to content most of the time, but it is a good tool for helping you kind of hone in that practice of plain language writing skills. So next we're going to jump over, we're going to talk about Easy Read. So what is it? Easy Read is developed to support people with intellectual disabilities to better understand written content. It uses a lot of the same concepts as plain language, but what it does is it takes that written information, it supports it with pictures so it's clear and easy to understand. So the example that we have on screen here, the sentence says, racial justice is making sure there are new plans to make sure things are fair. And then we have two icons off to the side kind of symbolizing this. So we've got a level scale, and then we have a green check mark. And then the next sentence says, racial justice is part of disability rights. And we have a few symbols again off to the side. One indicates people of various races. We have our level scale. We have the symbol for accessibility that you often see at like accessible parking spaces. And then we have this kind of scroll that says rights that kind of symbolizes the idea of laws and laws that are made related to disability rights. So that's kind of an idea of what Easy Read can be. You may be looking at this and thinking, oh, Easy Read, that's like an infographic, and it's really similar. Infographics can certainly be kind of more graphically inclined, designed versions of Easy Read, but ultimately Easy Read uses clear and easy to see and understand icons to help describe the sentences that they go along with. Okay. I do want to invite folks who are listening that if any point in time you have a question, feel free to pop it into the Q&A feature or use the chat. I'm kind of monitoring it throughout, and I'll take a moment to pause. A quick note on language and the language that we use. I know that there's already a training on disability culture that really dove into quite a bit of this, but I do want to take a second to offer a reminder that when we make our content, we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the language that we use surrounding disability. So person first versus identity first language. Person first language being literally putting the person before their descriptor, identity first language leading with that descriptor. People with disabilities often have preferences as to which type of language that they want to use for themselves, but ultimately it is important that you communicate with the person, with the individuals you're describing as to how they'd like to be described. So some person first examples we have are people with disabilities, women who are incarcerated, individual living with HIV, person with a substance use disorder. Those are all person first. Whereas identity first, we have disabled people, transgender person, Black person with a capital B, Indigenous people with a capital I, autistic person with a capital A. And I want to emphasize the reason I made sure to let you know that we use capital letters for those three groups is those three groups identify as cultural groups as well that are deserving of proper noun status with capitalization. So that's another one of those elements that you need to keep in mind when you're providing language to describe groups of people. Make sure that not only are you using person first or identity first, depending on preference, but also does this community identify with proper noun status? All right. So let's get into the meat here of making your content accessible. We've talked a lot about language and text so far. Now we're going to talk about kind of breaking it down and how it is that you'll utilize that content. So the content that you make for presentations, documents that accompany your events or promotions really must be accessible. So first, we're going to talk about accessible images. So when we talk about accessible images, you may have heard terms like alt text or image description. Alt text literally just means alternative text, and its purpose is to describe the visual content and information. It's primarily for people who are blind or low vision, and it's used for photos, graphics, GIFs, tables, charts, anything visual that could be presented to somebody in a digital space. Alt text is commonly shorter and coded, and alt text is read by screen reader assistive technology. It's typically 125 characters or less. Whereas image description is often longer and it's contained within the post associated with the image or the caption. And image description really benefits everyone because everyone has access to it. You do not have to have some form of assistive technology to access an image description. So folks who benefit from image description specifically, people who are newly blind or who have low vision that may not use screen reader technology can benefit from image description. For me, in my personal experience, I have a family member who's experiencing macular degeneration, and they don't use screen reader assistive technology. They don't really have any intention to. So image description is beneficial to them when they're wanting to access information about an image. Neurodivergent people, so people with disabilities that are related to attention, they can understand the point of the image based on the image description that you provide. But really, ultimately, everybody benefits. So an image description can really give you this cool opportunity to make a subjective image more personal. So for example, we could be talking about a photo of your pet. And you could use your image description to describe the personality traits that you think are reflected in the way that your pet appears. So the example I have on screen here is my husky is big and gray, but has kind and gentle blue eyes. So when I read that out loud, what's the information that we're taking in? Okay, we know that this is a husky, and we have a general idea of what huskies look like because they're a common breed. We know it's a big dog. You know, gray is the primary color, and we know that this husky has blue eyes. But we also have been described as the dog having kind and gentle eyes, which could tell us a little bit about the dog's demeanor and maybe perhaps the facial expression that it's making. Now, I don't have a picture of this dog on the screen, but I'm sure you have now developed a mental picture of what this dog looks like, and that is the purpose of image description. So you might be thinking, well, AI is out there and it's great and everybody's using it. Why don't I just use the automatically generated alt text? And I'm here to tell you, please do not do this. It's often very inaccurate, and we're going to look at an example shortly. But human generated alt text really allows you to control the narrative of your content, and it allows you to be more creative and personable. If any of you are content creators out there and you're looking for some inspiration, I encourage you to check out the National Park Service social media accounts, particularly on Instagram. Not only are they often hilarious, they provide really great image description that is clear and concise, but also funny. So they're able to control that narrative and make that content more creative and personable while exploring accessibility. So let's talk a little bit about some examples of automatically generated alt text. So on screen here, I've got an image of the Mona Lisa. I'm not going to over describe it because we're going to do a little something fun in a second. But I've got a couple of examples of some image descriptions that were automatically generated for this image. So this comes from a New York Times article called "The Hidden Image Descriptions Making the Internet Accessible" that came out in February 2022. Highly recommend. It's a very good read and gives a really good insight into image descriptions. But the first description we have is a painting of a person, which is accurate, but it really doesn't tell us what we need to know about this painting. The next one says, maybe, we're guessing, an image of one person and a strawberry, which is really not right at all. And then the last one is just the name of the file and how it was saved and uploaded onto the website. So I'm going to attempt to read this like a screen reader would, which is very robotic and fast. So it says Mona _ Lisa, _ by _ Leonardo _ da _ Vinci, from _ C2RMF _ retouch.jpg. And that is just terrible. If you're a screen reader user and you get to this image and you're just thinking, what in the world is this person trying to say to me? Like, what am I looking at? These examples come from Microsoft Word, Facebook, and Wikipedia. And I do want to highlight that the Facebook example is the image of one person and a strawberry, which there's millions of images getting uploaded to our social media platforms every day. And if this is the kind of automatically generated alt text that's being described or provided to people, we can see why it is that you cannot rely on it for full accessibility and inclusion. All right, so we've got another little test here. I want you to take a couple of minutes and write alt text image description for the Mona Lisa. So remember, alt text is 125 characters or less, whereas image description is a little bit longer. So take a second to write that image description in alt text and then put it in the chat for me or raise your hand to be unmuted. All right, we're about halfway through a minute. So start kind of wrapping up your descriptions and get ready to put them in the chat. Awesome. Okay, they're starting to come in. Yay. All right, so Amanda says, a portrait of a woman with dark hair divided down the middle and falling to her shoulders with hands across her lap and sly smile on her pale round face. Actually, that was Charles. Sorry, it bumped me down. Amanda said, woman wearing formal Renaissance era robes, seated, looking directly ahead at the viewer, offering a mysterious smile. We've got painting of a woman with crossed hands, gentle smile, warm colors, natural background. And then Cassidy says, image description, painting of a woman seated. Her hair is long and dark. Her eyes are brown. She has a slight smirk. One of her arms is wrapped around her body and the hand is resting on her wrist. And then Becca says, image of a painting of a woman with hands folded in her lap. She's sitting in a multicolored landscape background. Awesome. These are all really great examples of alt text and a few good examples of image description on here. So I'm going to show you guys our version. So we went with image description a little bit longer, but the first sentence we have is famous Renaissance painting, the Mona Lisa, which that in and of itself could have been an alt text description, since this is a painting that is very well known. Depending on the context of how this image is being provided, that may need to be the only bit that you're saying. Again, know your audience, know who you're speaking to. The image description itself goes on to say, features a white woman with fine, long, brown, curly hair, wearing dark period clothing, including a dress and a draped cloak. She's looking directly at the viewer in a smiling closed mouth, very subtly. Depiction of a distant landscape with a river, roads, bridge, and trees are in the background. So you'll notice a lot of us really made sure to take the time to describe her as a woman, to describe her race, her facial features, to talk about that subtle closed mouth smile, the Mona Lisa smile that this image is so famous for, that she's looking directly at the viewer. Again, depending on your audience and how it is that you're needing to describe an image, you may need to provide more or less information. If we were providing this image, let's say, to a group of children that have never encountered the Mona Lisa or Renaissance paintings before, we may need to describe a little further that a Renaissance painting, or this particular one, is very realistic. It is not abstract, and to kind of take it a step further. But there's lots of ways to provide image description and alt text. There's really no one right way, but it's really about knowing your audience and knowing what it is that you're trying to convey when you provide the images that you're providing. Great job, everybody. So a quick note on decorative versus essential images, because I'm sure some of you guys are thinking, okay, this is great, but what do I do when I have like a poster that's just covered in graphics and images? So we're going to get to that. Not every image in your content is necessarily important and should have alt text. How you decide what should have alt text or an image description is really based on the context of what you're providing. So first think, is it important to the purpose of your content? Does it make your content easier to understand, or does it add emotional significance to your content? If you're not sure, ultimately reach out to the client or creator of the image and ask their thoughts. And we've got a comment from Amanda asking, should every image have both alt text and image description? And I'm going to say yes, and it depends, which I think is everybody's favorite answer when it comes to ADA related questions. But I would, in our practice at Able, let's just go with social media, for example. Everything that we post, with the exception of Twitter because of its character limit, we provide both alt text and image description. Our alt text is often a shorter version of the image description that we've provided. Our image descriptions become very detailed. If this is an image that is accompanying a presentation and you're leading the presentation, you need to take the time to describe it. So that would be your image description. Whereas when you email out your presentation after the fact, it should have the alt text baked in. We're going to talk how to do that in a second. Similar if you're looking at a flyer that has some graphics or some images on it. In addition to doing general accessibility features on your flyer, you need to decide what visual elements on your flyer need to have alt text versus what needs to be marked as decorative. So it's kind of a yes and yes maybe, yes it depends type situation with whether or not you should provide both. Also, another thing about image description is it's a great backup if for some reason your alt text might fail to upload, which I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So alt text in most Microsoft products and really Apple products are the same, as well as Google Drive and some others. It's just as simple as right-clicking the image, selecting Edit Alt Text, and entering the title and description for the image, photographic, or shape. You can also mark it as decorative if it does not add content or understanding to the slide, but if that is the case, you honestly may want to consider removing it. So on screen here, we just have an image of from a Microsoft document of an image of two individuals kind of embracing each other. And the person who is using this took a quick screenshot of where they right-clicked, the alt text option shows up on the far right screen, and then there's a small box that says mark as decorative. So social media and alt text, these are some very commonly used products where you'll find the option to add alt text to your content. So all the Meta products, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads do have alt text. When Threads first came out, though, several months ago, it actually didn't, which caused quite the uproar in the disability community. Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, also has the option to add alt text, as does LinkedIn. Now, I will say LinkedIn's alt text option is very limited. I think it is limited to 125 characters or less, maybe even less. So you have to be pretty succinct in what you're going to say. But the Meta products and Twitter do allow for much longer forms of alt text. So that's just something to keep in consideration when you're writing. And then I have a note on here, because TikTok's a video app, alt text does not apply, but we are going to talk about ways to make your video content accessible. So alt text and other applications, I've got a few common places where you'll need to add alt text potentially. So things like mass email marketing, such as MailChimp, or we use Salsa Labs. Those all have options to add alt text. Adobe's PDF accessibility editor, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Google Drive products, all of these have options to add alt text. Ultimately, it's worth a Google search to check and see how it is that you can add alt text to your products. Also, if you use a social media scheduling app, there's often a place within that scheduler to add alt text to your images, but sometimes it can be buried. So if you do use one of those, consider consulting with the company and saying, hey, where is the option for me to add alt text to my images? when I do upload them here. If you have one and they come back and say, oh, you can't add alt text, we rely solely on the automatically generated alt text that's provided by that social media platform. I highly encourage you to end your contract with them and find a new one, because that is a service that you should not be paying for, because it is not providing really just the basics of accessibility. And there's lots of really good options out there. We use SCAD at Able South Carolina because as of now, SCAD is the only scheduling platform where you can embed alt text in Instagram images, which you can imagine if you post something to schedule something to post in Instagram and it goes up and your alt text doesn't go with it, you then have to go to Instagram every time a new post comes up and edit your alt text. And that's just creating more work for you than you need to do. So just keep these things in mind. I think we've got a question in the Q&A real quick. This is great. I want to share it with my coworker. I have to leave shortly. I know this is being recorded. Will this be shared later? Yes, this I believe will be shared later. I think Amanda is replying. Thanks, guys. Okay. So we talked a lot about images. Let's talk about accessible audio real quick. So captions, always provide captioning for any audio content. You can provide either open captions, which are captions that are always there, you cannot remove them, or closed captions. These are captions that can be turned on and off. Open captions, you'll usually see those provided on platforms like Instagram Reels and TikTok. Closed captions, that's commonly provided on platforms like Facebook Watch or YouTube. On all of these platforms, you can edit the automatically generated captions, which I highly recommend, especially in the South. Our accents tend to lead to some very unusual text, and you don't want anything that you're saying to get misconstrued, right? So take the time to go in and do those quick edits to those automatically generated captions. And then offer a transcript if you're able alongside your video content, particularly long form content. If you're providing, for example, a recorded Zoom webinar, you can provide the transcript for that. So who benefits from captions and transcripts? Of course, people who are deaf or low hearing certainly benefit, but also neurodivergent people. So this would be people with disabilities that are related to attention. They can often more easily follow the audio with a visual of a text. I am one of those folks who really benefit from having the captions on when I watch a movie or a TV show in my household. I am able to pay closer attention. I don't miss anything. So it's important to have those captions available. But really, everyone benefits from the captions. Captions are also becoming very preferred as many social media users choose to watch videos with no sound. Let's say they're in a public place or they're in shared spaces. They're wanting to access videos on their phone, but they don't want to bother the people around them. They're going to watch it on mute. And also, if you experience technical difficulties with your sound, sometimes the captions or transcripts still may be able to capture the audio track for these moments, which is a great backup to have. I do want to take a second just to re-emphasize the importance of having captions on your video content, especially if you're creating content on TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube. There's a lot of data and statistics out there that show if you're producing content and you're not including captioning, you're not getting views, which means that you've just spent time creating content for no reason. I actually even know of a few professional companies that boast themselves as great social media developers that can boost your brand that still make content without captions, which is just such a disservice to their clients. Because if you do not have captions attached, I can guarantee you you're losing the majority of your audience, because most social users prefer to watch their content on mute unless there's a note specifically in the post that tells them that they should listen to the audio. So another note on creating accessible videos, we've talked about the audio of these videos, but it's also important to ensure that audio and visual descriptions are provided to ensure that content is accessible. So when utilizing video content, you need to make sure that the visual content is accessible by using what we call audio descriptions. Y'all may have heard of this before. Let's say you've got a TV show, movie that you're watching, you pull it up on Netflix and you go into the accessibility features, there's an option to turn on the audio descriptions, and that will then describe what is happening on screen, what is happening within the scene. If you're using a platform with posting available for video content, so a post that would accompany it, such as TikTok or Instagram, consider providing visual descriptions of your video as applies. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So who benefits from audio and visual description? This is really going to be people who are blind or have low vision, as well as neurodivergent people who may have difficulty related to attention to understand the point of the video. They may need a description to understand why it is that they're seeing what they're seeing. So we've got an example here of accessible audio and video content. And I'm going to press play. I want you to listen. I want you to see, kind of take it in. But I want to know, are there elements of accessibility in this video that you think we could have done better? I've got a hint. Could have to do with captioning.
Get ready for Advocacy Day. Put on your official t-shirt and button. Be sure to wear sunscreen to protect your skin. Make your way towards the State House. Alyssa runs outside with an official t-shirt and mini flag. Alyssa runs down Main Street, downtown Columbia. Alyssa crosses Main Street with the State House in the background. Alyssa runs on the State House grounds towards the steps. Alyssa makes it to the top of the steps and jumps for joy. We'll see you Wednesday, April 13th.
Okay, so this is a video that my coworker Alyssa and I made a few years ago for our Advocacy Day event. And as you were watching, you most likely saw and heard what she was doing. So you could have closed your eyes and visualized the actual scene of what was occurring. That's an audio description. We also provided captioning of all of the audio that was being said. Now, I asked, what do you think we could have done better in this? And the hint was captioning. When I created this video originally, I used the automatically generated automatically generated captioning. And I did go in and I made edits to the way that it captured my voice. But I didn't think to put a dark background behind this white text that often appeared in light places. We're going to talk a little bit about making sure you use proper color contrast in a second. So that could have been hard for some people to see and read. Also, the captioning was at the bottom, which is normally where we find captions when we're watching a movie or a television show. But on mobile devices and using Instagram or TikTok, a lot of times when we put our captioning at the bottom, that is also the space where the description of the one who posted is, or the actual post caption itself is there. It could cover up the captioning that you've just spent time creating, making it completely useless. It's best practice to either move that captioning up more closer to the middle of the screen or even above the actual main visuals that are happening on your screen. So when you're capturing your video content, think about where in the screen you're going to put that caption so that it is not blocked out by the elements of the post in these different platforms. All right, so let's talk a little bit about building accessible content. I'm not going to get super in the weeds today with headings, links, reading order, and tables because Sarah's going to be going over a lot of that when she does a deep dive into accessible documents and web accessibility. But I did want to make a note about the importance of these elements. So headings are important, not just for clearly organizing your content, but making it possible for a screen reader user to navigate your content, to move from points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As you can see in the visual that we have on the side here, how headings are kind of held underneath each other. Sarah often describes when we do these presentations together, thinking of headings like that of a chapter book. And you've got your title, heading 1, and then let's say Act 1, heading 2, Chapter 1, heading 3, so on and so forth. Links should be labeled clearly to indicate where links in a document or website leads. It's not enough to just say linked here. because we don't know what here is. And let's say you have 3 links on a page and they all say click here. If you're trying to navigate using your screen reader user and everything just says click here, click here, click here, that's going to be difficult to navigate because you don't know where you're going. Reading order. This allows people to who are using screen readers to access your content equitably. So if your reading order is not set correctly, a screen reader could jump all over the page to read. For example, with this slide, it would be really bizarre for it to first read the bottom sentence and then the top sentence and then the title and then the third sentence. You want to make sure that your reading order is made in a way that is clear and easy to understand. Tables. Tables are incredibly tricky. Screen readers read across rows and not down columns. So we always like to tell people, do not use tables to lay out your documents. That's a guarantee that you will break the accessibility of it, and really only use it to display data. And if you're making a table and you're really just not sure, consult with a disability-led group that can help you determine whether or not your table is accessible. And then always provide a text caption below a table to explain the specifics of what it shows. So some notes on colors and fonts. So you want to be sure that your documents and web pages use high contrast colors like black and white, black and red. We've got some examples on the right side of the screen here. Be careful with blues and greens because they're not often read easily by people who are colorblind. Make sure your fonts are large enough to be read easily. 18-point font is really kind of the gold standard, especially for things like slide presentations. And always use sans serif fonts. Many standard and widely available fonts score high for web accessibility, but the most common are ones we have listed here: Tahoma, Calibri, Helvetica, Arial, Veranda, Times New Roman. If you're not sure, quick Google search can tell you whether or not a font is truly accessible. Slab serif fonts, including Arvo, Museo Slab, and Rockwell, are also considered to be accessible. We usually use these for headings instead of body text because those slab fonts, when they're in large body text, can actually kind of develop this dizzying effect for people with different kinds of disabilities. So keep these things in consideration. So some of the examples we have of some good color contrast include black and white against each other, yellow on black, that's good, black on orange, black on green, white on purple, all great examples. Our bad examples, some of y'all may be looking at that and struggling to even see what it says. Blue on black is terrible. I can barely see that one. Green on orange and red on green is bad for folks who are red-green colorblind. That would just look gray. And gray on purple, that's bad too. If you're not sure of what to do, there are really great free color contrast checkers out there, and we're going to provide those resources at the end. So another note on fonts: imposter letters. Woo. Some font families use practically identical letter shapes for different characters. So for example, an uppercase I, a lowercase L, and the number 1. If they all look the same next to each other, that's what we call an imposter letter. So we have an example here of Gill Sans, which seems like it would be a great accessible font. But as you can see, those imposter letters make it impossible to decipher what am I looking at. Versus Tahoma, we can clearly tell this capitalized I, lowercase L, and number 1. Brief note on the accessibility checker that's available in many tools. This one in particular is from Microsoft Products. You can go in, select check accessibility, and this box will appear and it will show you what's missing or incorrect and give you information on how to fix the problem. This is a really great tool, especially if you're just starting out. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to use it, but I do give a word of caution that it is always best, especially for kind of robust, let's say you're making a large pamphlet, to have that reviewed by a digital accessibility team led by people with disabilities. So a quick note about building content in Microsoft products, just because those are typically accessible to most people, most organizations, regardless of size and how what their fee structures look like. If you build your content accessibly in Microsoft products, you can properly export it over into Adobe Pro to have an accessible PDF. Sarah is going to get a little bit into the weeds of what some of this looks like with the presentation she's doing in a couple months from now, but I did want to just kind of take note that this is a great streamlined option that can save you a lot of time. InDesign is another popular product that people like to use, but we do have a word of caution related to InDesign. While it does allow for the creation of some accessible aspects of PDFs, the accessibility does not always transfer over well to the Adobe PDF, which seems really silly because it's an Adobe product. But that is the world of trying to create things accessibly for people with disabilities. So be sure you're checking your content manually and in depth after bringing it over so you can redo any necessary accessibility features. And I also want to talk quickly about Canva because it's an incredibly popular tool that you can use to make really quick, easy graphics. Canva and honestly, Adobe Express, I'm going to lump it in here too, which is fairly new because it's pretty similar to Canva. But Canva and Adobe Express do not currently allow for the creation of accessible content. Accessibility is actually in beta on Canva, so you may have seen some of that if that's something you use a lot. But if you carry out your PDF design work using the platform, we recommend that you switch to using Adobe Pro or a Microsoft product or InDesign and double checking your accessibility features. Because while you can add the accessibility features in Canva, you can add your alt text, you can change your reading order. When you go to export it out of Canva, it does not export out, which is incredibly frustrating. Sometimes elements of it do export out, but it doesn't entirely. So do keep that in mind. Again, Sarah's going to get a little bit into the weeds of this when she does her presentation in a few months, but I did want to make sure that we highlighted that. Meanwhile, Adobe Express does not have a way to add alt text and some other accessibility features, which again, silly because it's an Adobe product, but maybe it'll get added one day. Also, just another point of clarification about Canva. I'm not saying don't use this product altogether. We do use it here at Able, typically to make graphics content that we're going to be uploading to social media because we're going to be adding the alt text to it anyway. So there's kind of a time and a place where you can use these products. So a quick note on web accessibility. Oh, and actually, I'm sorry, before I do that, I do want to say one more thing. Especially related to creating flyers and making sure that those flyers are accessible. You don't have to be a graphic designer who's very skilled at Photoshop to make good accessible content. I myself do not consider myself a graphic designer, but I make flyers very regularly for Able. And what I commonly use is actually Microsoft PowerPoint because it's a really powerful tool that I know I can still make good looking stuff and export out into my PDF and still hold all of my accessibility features. It'll keep my reading order. It'll keep my alt text. It will keep all the elements that I needed to add to it to ensure that I've created something that's accessible. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're thinking, I don't know how to use some of these like big fancy products. You don't have to know how to use them. All it takes is a little bit of ingenuity and a bit of practice. Okay, so web accessibility. This is another one that I'm not going to get super in depth with today, but I did want to touch on the importance of accessible sites. So your website should be made accessible from the start. Not all web development platforms are created equally. WordPress and Squarespace are two popular ones, and those can definitely be created accessibly and often very easily. Wix is really popular, but it often favors looks over functionality and accessibility. If anybody's a Great British Baking Show fan, you may have heard the phrase style over substance, and that's something that we often see with Wix programs. It's not to say you can't make it accessible, but it can be really enticing to skip over the accessibility features in favor of some of its fancy shiny elements. Also, accessibility overlays, that may be something that you've heard of before. Accessibility overlays are a really popular tool that are sold often to folks who are looking for that quick fix to make their website accessible. And I'm telling you, don't buy it. And I have a note on here. It's actually a phrase I said to somebody one time, which was accessibility overlays are really the snake oil of internet accessibility. They are advertised as healing all your ailments with this tincture, and it will take care of you, and it will do what you need it to. But the reality is, we know accessibility overlays often create more problems or completely break sites for screen reader users. And I have a link to an article here. It's a New York Times article from June of 2022, very good accessibility article here, titled "For Blind Internet Users, the Fix Can Be Worse Than the Flaw." And it starts with the story of a gentleman who was a big ham radio fan who purchased radio parts from this website for 15 years. And one day he went in to make a purchase and suddenly he couldn't use the site anymore because they bought an accessibility overlay that broke it for his screen reader. And they lost a 15-year-long customer, which is absolutely terrible. So if you're thinking to yourself now, oh dear, I don't know if my website is accessible or I've got an accessibility overlay, what do I do? Don't worry, we're here to help. We'd be happy to consult with you and to talk through that with you and help you make determinations about what it is that you need to take back to your web developer to make these corrections, to fix these things, to upgrade. So a note on accessibility checkers. You can check to see if your website is accessible by using some free accessibility checkers available online. But a couple of pros and cons on that. The pros are they can be very educational, very eye-opening. They're often free and immediate. The reports give a list of issues. They allow you to learn about built-in features that are in your applications. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do it. It just spits out the information. The cons are it can produce false positives and false negatives because it's not a person. They often only work with certain browsers or software programs, so their application's relatively limited, and the reports still need to be properly interpreted. So ultimately, it's for the best if you can take a look at that, kind of get your feet wet for what it means to follow web accessibility, but turn around and consult with a disability-led agency. We can help you make a determination about what needs to be done to bring your website up to full accessibility standards. So the last thing I want to talk about today is event accessibility and ensuring that your programs are accessible from the start. So what do I mean when I say that? We're going to talk a little bit about accessible registration and things like that. So when setting up your event registration, your program registration, your ticketing platform, make sure the platform you're using is accessible. Make sure it's accessible to screen readers and keyboard-only navigation. You do not want keyboard traps. Keyboard trap is when somebody's using a keyboard to navigate and they get stuck in one place and they're stuck in a loop. They can't advance forward. They can't get to the next step. You can search for accessible registration software. We use Salsa Labs, which is a purchased by Bonterra company. Blackbaud, if you have access to that, also creates accessible registration. Eventbrite is accessible. But even Google Forms or Microsoft Forms, if you're not needing to do ticketing, but you just need to collect information, you can create forms accessible using Google and Microsoft products. But ultimately, if you're unsure if your registration platform is accessible, you can contact a disability-led organization like Able to run an accessibility check. Let me get some water real quick. So in addition to making sure that your general registration is accessible, it's important that you are taking accommodation requests up front. So when you make that registration page, you need to offer a place for participants to request accommodations for their disabilities. So an example of what you could say is, what, if any, accommodations do you need to attend this event, virtual webinar, whatever it is that you're calling it? And then I would highly recommend listing examples for people who might be unfamiliar with the term. When you say, what accommodations do you need? A lot of people could think do they think I need a hotel for this event? And not understand you're referring to accommodations for people with disabilities. So you could list the examples and say, do you need captioning, ASL interpretation, large print, etc. Are you going to have food at your event? You need to ask, do you have any dietary restrictions or food allergies? And then you can list examples for people who may be unsure of how to answer. This could be vegetarian, gluten-free, nut allergy. And then give people the space to write in their responses to you, to describe in their own words what their accommodation needs should be or what dietary restrictions they may have. Ultimately, though, you do not need to ask somebody if they have a disability. Your question should not be, do you have a disability? Yes or no? And then what accommodation do you need? Because frankly, you don't need to know what somebody's disability is or if they have one. What you need to know is, how can I accommodate you? So some common accommodations, these are common what we call reasonable accommodations that are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, would include things like captioning, ASL, large print, accessible digital documents sent in advance of a meeting. So for example, a PDF of a presentation to follow along, Braille documents, visual descriptions, breaks. Providing breaks can be a great accommodation for folks. Access to the event for their PCA, that is short for personal care attendant, or access to the event for their service animal, or allergy or dietary restriction friendly foods are all things that should be considered. You may be thinking, oh, PCA, isn't that another person, charge another fee? Do I really need to accommodate that? And truthfully, yes, you do. A PCA is somebody who ensures that a person with a disability can equitably access a space. So that is somebody that you would need to accommodate just as you would accommodate a service animal. So I also have a few examples of unreasonable accommodations because I do want to clarify that not everything is an accommodation. So for example, transportation. Unless your event is providing transportation to everyone who's coming to it, or like it's a bus tour, or you're busing people from point A to point B, you do not need to provide transportation for somebody to come to your event. There's some people who are bold and they may put that in as their accommodation request, but that is not something that you need to accommodate unless you're providing transportation to everyone. Access to the event for friends, family, or pets. This does not include PCAs or service animals. If somebody says, I want my mom to come because I just love my mom so much, that's not a reasonable accommodation. But if somebody reaches out and says, my mom is my PCA, that is a reasonable accommodation. Or, I have a service animal. That is a reasonable accommodation. And then meals when one is not provided as part of the event. If somebody says, oh, I need you to feed me as an accommodation, but you're not planning on feeding anybody else, that's not a reasonable accommodation. You do not have to accommodate that. But ultimately, if you're unsure, you can always consult with a disability-led organization like us to determine if an accommodation request is reasonable. Another note on accommodations, it's always best practice to have a point person for your accessibility needs before, during, or after an event. They should have the basic understanding of the requirements of the ADA, what's reasonable, what's not. Your point person can take accommodation requests and handle them directly with the attendee, kind of offering them a nice concierge level experience. But accommodation requests are not and should not be treated as a burden. They are how a lot of people equitably access events, information, and more. So note on Zoom etiquette, you may be having in-person events, but maybe you're also offering some options for people to join online. It's best to prepare your participants for your virtual presentation in advance so they know what to expect. So provide them with information on how to join the meeting from the link that you've set up. Set up sound and video, follow social rules for a video meeting, use platform controls. We have a Zoom etiquette PDF that we provide for trainings that we offer to groups that we call consumers at Able that we're happy to provide, but they include easy read visuals, engaging videos, and more. But they can be a great walkthrough. I know it's really easy to slip into, oh, since the pandemic, everybody's used to joining virtually. There's still a lot of people out there who've never touched it, who really do need the coaching. There's a lot of people who go and they log on every week, and every week they still aren't really sure what to do. It never hurts to walk somebody through it. So some Zoom keyboard shortcuts for screen readers. I'm not going to read everything that's on screen here, but I do think it's important to mention that there are some different elements to Zoom that can actually be challenging for screen reader users, and that is particularly the chat. The chat can interrupt the audio of a screen reader user. Incoming messages could, let's say I'm giving a presentation and somebody says something in the chat while I'm talking. The screen reader user's audio is going to get interrupted from hearing my presentation to hearing what somebody's submitting in the chat. But there are options to hide that chat panel so that it does not do that. And I've got a couple of kind of hotkey remedies for those problems on screen here. So captions, just like with your promotions of your event, of what you're going to do, you're going to want to make sure you provide captioning for the audio dialogue of your actual presentation of your actual event. Zoom has the option to enable manual captioning, auto captioning, and transcription. I've got all the details here on how to do that. But while auto captioning might be okay for some meetings, it's really not suitable for formal presentations, and you should consider assigning a third-party captioner. And I've got the details on how to do that there as well. But there's captioning services out there, just like how we have ASL service here with us today, that can provide accurate captioning for what it is you're doing. And then another note on transcription. Enabling a transcription allows users to view a full transcription of your presentation in a meeting in a side panel so that they can kind of continuously keep up with what's going on. ASL, in addition to providing captions and transcription, American Sign Language might be an accommodation you need to provide to deaf participants. So first, secure your sign language interpreter. You can use a local agency. There are also other great options as well. One we have on here is from a nationwide company called Sign Glasses. They serve all 50 states. But they can provide captioning and ASL services, and they have a lot of really cool options. One of them being the option for the user to actually wear a pair of glasses where they can see someone signing directly to them, which could be a cool option, let's say, for not a virtual event, but an in-person event where you're wanting them to kind of walk through and experience the space. A lot of our arts world, especially museums, may have spaces where somebody needs to walk through and experience. And instead of having an ASL interpreter kind of walking around and trailing them around, this could be somebody who's actually just visible only to them in their glasses and kind of removing maybe some of those elements that could prevent them from being able to have a fully integrated experience. Also, as far as ASL is considered for Zoom platforms, there is a setting in Zoom under their advanced settings that allows you to assign a participant as your ASL or sign language interpreter, and it's called Sign Language Interpretation View. And this is also available for, let's say, if you're providing a Spanish interpreter or somebody who's interpreting in Mandarin. There's a lot of cool features that Zoom now offers to be able to provide interpretation in multiple languages, including ASL, on separated screens in a separate video channel so that that interpreter gets to work directly with the person that they're serving. So visual descriptions, I provided my visual description at the beginning, as did Amanda. But it's important to remember that people with visual disabilities might be participating in your presentation, and you really need to provide a visual description of anything that appears on screen. So read the text, describe the visuals. If it's a repetitive visual, you don't have to describe it every single time. For example, the Able Access logo has been on every single one of my slides, but I'm not reading it every time, right? And then describe yourself in a visual description before you begin your formal presentation. And then I have an example here of how it is to do that visual description and kind of talk through why it is we do it, because this is how we practice true inclusion. And again, another example of how to do that. And then a quick note on breakout rooms. Unfortunately, Zoom breakout rooms are not always accessible to your participants due to captioning difficulty. Live transcription and captioning is not supported in breakout rooms. Only one participant, like your captioner, can be assigned to type closed captions in a meeting, so it's only possible to have one breakout session with closed captioning. Best practice, be prepared to have captioning provided in an external window. You can coordinate with your captioning service on that. And then finally, hosting hybrid tips. Maybe you're having an in-person event and you want to have the option for people to join virtually too. Especially, in times of heightened sickness like flu, COVID seasons. People with disabilities may not be able to access what it is that you're providing because of weakened immune systems. And a hybrid option could be really great for them. So consider selecting a venue with adequate access to high-speed internet and direct wire in as opposed to wireless. Consider hiring a team to operate your in-person event sound, audio, and visual, and cameras to capture the event. Ensure your in-room audio is fed into your streaming platform. Make sure your ASL interpreter is always on camera next to your presenters. Have your captioner at your in-person event to provide live captioning on the presentation screen as well as to your virtual audience. And then lastly, have a staff person monitor your virtual audience chat to give them an opportunity to engage with in-person speakers with what's happening live. I think we've got something in the Q&A asking about will the recording be shared? I think Amanda's replying, so yeah. So I want to end with just ultimately, I know this was a ton of information, but we can help. Please consult with organizations run and operated by people with disabilities like us at Able South Carolina. Accessibility is absolutely an ongoing process. The more steps you take ahead of time, the less work you'll have to do in your accessibility check. But it's something that you learn with practice and learn as you continually implement. So a few resources, I've got some links about effective communication and ADA requirements, creating accessible documents, some free color contrast checkers. Really, really highly recommend if you're making graphics content. The color contrast checkers are super easy to use and they just tell you straight up, this is great or this is bad. The Noun Project offers free symbols and images that you can use for easy read or creating infographics that you want to use to help kind of highlight important text. Rewordify is a site that gives suggestions for plain language. And the last one I have on here is called effecttheverb.com. They have a stock image and interview series called Disabled in Here that celebrates disabled, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. And the images are really great. So if you're thinking that, oh, I need to make a flyer that really shows the people that I'm trying to serve, I want it to be clear that my event's accessible, that my event's inclusive. You can go to the Disabled in Here site, find some great images of BIPOC individuals who are disabled and utilize those. And the best part is your alt text and image description are already written. They have all of that provided there because the models that they use helped write the image descriptions of themselves. So great, great tool. Okay. So I am happy to answer any questions anyone may have. I know that's a lot of info. I will also say again, this was very high level view. We really just kind of skirted on the outside edge of accessibility. If you're getting this and you're thinking, wow, my team really needs to go more in depth, we do offer opportunities for workshops or additional presentations. And then of course you can work with us and our Able Access team to check out your content and let you know what might need to get changed. But happy to answer any questions now. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being a part. I really appreciate it. Again, you may go home today and realize you have 50-something questions. Feel free to reach out. We're happy to help. This the slide presentation, I believe, will be provided after the fact. That does have some of those links to resources and things as well.
Thank you so much, Mary. This information was so helpful, and it is a little overwhelming, but you presented it in a way that really feels digestible, and kind of, I think it's all something we are learning and trying to improve on. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining today. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted soon on our Disability and Arts Webinars page on the South Carolina Arts Commission's website. And please, we would love for you all to join our next webinar, which will be on April 3rd at the same time. And it's going to be about building inclusion through employees and volunteers with disabilities. So we look forward to seeing you again next month.
Thank y'all so much. I would like to issue kind of a challenge to those who are still here. I think one of the easiest things that you can start to implement today is using image descriptions and alt text in what you produce in your social media content. And if you're really wanting to see examples of that, check out our social accounts for Able South Carolina. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. But you can see how it is that we do that there and kind of use that to help guide you in doing that on your own.